Welcome, everybody. It looks like we're already recording. And I'm just going to thank you for showing up for this inclusion study group conversation about microaggressions. Yeah, and I guess I'll just kind of throw it out there with a story. One of my friends was telling me that she didn't know what microaggression meant until one time when her daughter was, her daughter had come out as a transgender child very, very young. Like at 18 months and 2 years, she was saying, I'm a girl, I'm a girl. So the parents were explaining that to this, to their Quaker church family group. And the little girl was then about 3 or so and was running around with a stick, whacking things and playing the way children do. And one of the older elders leaned over and said, that is not what girls do. That is not how girls behave. And my friend was saying, it kind of struck her like, oh, that's a microaggression. I get it now. It's not intentional, where nobody's trying to upset somebody, but it's an unconscious kind of emergence of our hidden bias. And that was a really interesting event for her. And I bet that almost all of us have had some kind of experience with microaggressions in our own lives. We've either seen them or experienced them ourselves or accidentally perpetrated them. So I wondered if anyone had any ideas about that or what they might want to say about it.
Tried to think of some things.
Yeah, speak up.
Tried to think of some things that might have happened, but I've heard it done to other people, and it grabs me by the throat every time. You must have a good answer to a person that does this. That's how I'm figuring this thing out.
Right.
You know, why, if somebody's going to say something slight to me like that, let's say refer to my shortness or to my weight or anything like that, I think I need to be clever enough to start saying, oh, you have such unique phrasing about me. Would you like to put it in a book? And then we can all enjoy your work. But there's just being silly right now because I think it's such a horrible thing to happen to people.
And that's true. And sometimes it can really feel like a slap in the face. And there are a lot of different ways to respond. And I think it is important to respond because, you know, this is when people say silence is violence. Like if we ignore something that we observe or something that happens to us, there's no opportunity for change. But I think one thing that's really important is to kind of figure out, do you feel safe? I mean, is this a situation where you can safely say, wow, that really was uncomfortable. I wondered what you actually meant by that. Or could you think about what you just said and see another way to say that? Or something like that. I mean, one thing that you can escalate pretty quickly, usually. And really the minute we call out, you know, racism or sexism, we've kind of stopped the conversation right there because that wakes up huge defensiveness in most of us. So part of the trick, I think, is trying to figure out how to create conversation, or as they say now, dialogue, instead of confrontation. Like,
would be a better way. Yeah.
Well, yeah, there's something called bystander training. Has anyone participated in that?
No, that sounds interesting.
It is. It's been developed at a lot of colleges, and now a number of corporations are using it too, because in college situations, it's often the microaggressions or micro insults or micro attacks are often about like date rape or about really sexist or really racist situations that can come up. And making sure that somebody feels supported is really important. Like maybe going over and standing next to that person and saying, wow, how did that feel? That felt weird to me. You may find out that the person you think has been attacked didn't really notice it or didn't mind, but you might more likely find out that they did notice and they did mind. And sometimes just being willing to step up and say, I heard that and it didn't really feel very good to me. Would you like me to say something? That's one way to kind of go with it.
I like the whole idea of always being a support to someone. Because, like you say, they may not hear what happened to them or integrate it, but some way they have to know that the public around them is on their team when things go wrong.
Yes.
I'm tired of people just crossing their arms and saying, it's not my problem. Well, it is your problem. That's why we have a lot of people that don't get taken care of. They get lost in the shuffle of life because people don't support them.
You know, one really interesting reason people don't support them is because they think, it's really bizarre to me, they don't want to be rude. And it's like, whoa, honey, somebody just was super offensive and you don't want to be rude. And you don't have to be rude. You don't have to say that was completely unacceptable, but you can say, I wonder if you recognize how that sounded. Or you can say, gosh, I'm curious why you would say something like that. It seemed pretty uncalled for. Can you say a little more about what was going on for you? And that can open up a little bit of a, and often people are quite unaware.
For me, and I think I would have to say, I feel offended for this lady because you are a man, because you don't get it.
That's exactly right. Most often people don't get it. And again, you know, creating a confrontation can make it harder for them to get it. And creating a conversation can make it a little bit easier for them to start to get it anyway. You know, even one of the very common examples is saying things like, or you hear somebody say, wow, that's amazing for a Black girl that you know that. That's really interesting. Right? Or I've had so many friends who are from other countries say things like, they come here and immediately people say, why are you wearing those weird clothes? Or, God, do you know your food really smells awful? Feeling totally free to say incredibly offensive things. And you think,
would you repeat?
You mind shutting your mouth, ma'am?
well, again, you know, you don't want to
you-
trigger a painful confrontation, but I think sometimes explaining how that sounded to you can be really helpful.
Could you repeat what this is called? By what?
Bystander
Bystander
training.
communications?
Bystander training is a common, and you can look it up online. There's a lot of different programs, but it really helps people know get some tools in their toolkit for what to do when you witness a microaggression, a micro assault, a micro insult. Rather than just standing by and feeling helpless, there are some tools we can use. And one of them is trying to open conversation.
And why is it called micro rather than just aggression or insult or whatever?
Great question, Sheila. A lot of times they're subtle and they're usually unintentional. And it can be, some people have called it, you know, death by 1,000 paper cuts. Like it's little mini insults or walking, you know, a woman walks into a meeting full of men and tries to say something and she just keeps getting talked over. It's probably not deliberate, but it is a micro insult, a micro assault. Nobody says, shut up, woman, but it's kind of implied by the actions. Or, you know, one of the common examples is an American citizen who has Oriental ancestry goes and does something and people say, wow, your English is so good. Where are you from? And they say, San Diego. And they're like, no, where are you really from? In other words, you couldn't possibly be an American if you have Asian background. And your English must be good because clearly you speak some other language at home. Well, maybe they don't. So that kind of assumption is considered a microaggression, and it's unconscious and it's usually not really on purpose.
And the reason for the micro concept or the word micro or the preface of micro is that it's small or subtle or not really seen kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
I mean, calling out super strong racism is easy enough in some ways, right? It's pretty clear. But the micro thing, it was really started being called out in the 70s, in college situations mostly, and has been kind of built on ever since. But it's really started to boom in the last maybe 4 or 5 years on social media, and like TikTok, and I don't know so much about Facebook, but Tumblr and some of the formats that the kids use more. They're getting much more attention, and people are calling stuff out a lot faster. But
Well,
it's baffling and confusing to people who don't understand that they have been offensive.
I'm
Reed?
troubled by what I'm hearing. Is it really micro, or is the approach simply being that we're trying to be politically correct in pointing these things out?
And that's a good point, Richard. And that gets called out a lot. Like people say, you're just too sensitive. People are too sensitive these days. And man, you can't say anything without being called out for being politically incorrect. But what it really represents is an increasing awareness that a lot of our culture is unconsciously extremely racist and sexist. And so
Okay.
a lot of the things we don't even think about saying turn out to be, if you really think deeply about it, you might say, wow, I don't think I want to say that anymore. I don't think I want to assume that anymore. And does that make sense?
Yeah.
I can accept that, yeah.
Reed, did you have something you wanted to say?
Well, I'll defer to Vanera first.
Oh, thank you. When I was younger, I went to work for as a receptionist for a company, and the crew got in the lobby and started talking, and they started saying, now this may not be what we're talking about, but I picked up on it as, anyway, they started saying things like Jew him down. And I
Definitely
actually came out of my shoes, and I stood up and I said to them, do you mind moving your ugly mouths out of my room? And they didn't get it, and I insulted everybody, I guess. But how do I end up? Am I in a micro thing? I'm not sure I am. You understand what I said or not?
Yeah, I do. I mean, it's like what we were saying before, that sometimes when we counter, someone has said something really offensive, and then we are kind of offensive right back, that can create a much more confrontational situation.
Yes.
But if we try to be, I mean, one of the keynotes of the bystander training thing is they say, try to approach it with sort of humility and compassion, and say, I wonder if you really heard yourself, or I wonder if you recognize what that sounds like to other people, or do you really feel like an entire population has one trait in common and you're kind of putting that out. Trying not to be super judgmental, but trying to be clear that something has been said that really deserves to be questioned and looked at a little more closely. There's there isn't a list of 1, 2, 3 things to do or say, but I guess the real issue seems to be, how do we want to bring awareness to something that's really painful and hurtful for a lot of people?
A lot of us are old, and we remember times when there was no censorship. It was so ugly out there. Everybody was getting stampeded. And so I am so thrilled, because we're in an era where we are doing a little bit more politically correct, because it was for sure they weren't going to teach it in school to the kids standing up. It ended up being bullies and being discouraging for other people. Anyway, I like the whole new scene of revealing this stuff. We need to clean our act.
It's true, and it can be really uncomfortable, but I think it's really important. Reed.
Yeah, so actually using Venera's example as an example of how it seems as though it can be innocent, or it can be maybe not even a microaggression, but or at least not an intentional one. Reminds me of, and I know that Woody Allen is kind of a toxic character maybe, but in Annie Hall, there's a scene where he's visiting this WASP family, and he turns to Annie, I think, and says, he distinctly said, "Jew eat." He said, "Jew eat." He was calling me out. So that would be like a misinterpreted microaggression as humor, but it's the idea that that someone doesn't know doesn't know exactly whether they're being called out or they're misinterpreting the situation, and that can be as painful to them because they aren't sure.
Right.
And I think we need to defend people, like I said before. If they don't have a comeback and they've just been smacked in the kisser with one of these micros, then it's time that somebody stand next to them and say, speak better or something. Clean up.
Yeah, they may not know that they're because they haven't reflected on their racism or bigotry as being, as you said, Anne, sort of in the water they drank when they were growing up.
I've been rereading some old favorite books and finding that I can't take pleasure in them anymore because so many books that were written in the 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s are incredibly racist and misogynistic. They have casual slurs all over the place. And it appalls me to realize that I didn't notice that when I was reading them as a younger person. And now you start waking up to things and start thinking, oh dear, I mean, that is really, and it's so unconscious that it really is woven into the fabric of our language and our lives. And that's the piece that has to change, which means we have to get ready to be uncomfortable sometimes because we may be called out ourselves for saying something thoughtless. And then how do we want to react to that?
Well, we've got a lot of changes going on all around us. Women have suddenly realized that they have a pair of balls of their own. Sorry to be that graphic, but it is what we needed to do to grow. We need to learn from the men also, and men need to listen to us. So we are constantly educating these days, I see. I, for one, would like to see children go through classes on communication, pure communication, learn how to talk to each other without putting each other down.
Mm-hmm. And you know what that really says is that teachers need to have that education first, and then parents, right? And church communities and all kinds of organizations. And that is starting to happen. But I think what can be difficult for people is if you grow up in, I mean, I remember being in a study group about white fragility and having someone say, you know, I grew up in Texas and my mother, I realized now, she didn't really think brown people were fully human. And she sort of sat with that and we all sat with that. And I thought, yeah, you know, if you grow up with that unspoken assumption, you can't help but absorb some of it. And some part of you may say, wow, that doesn't feel right. But it might be a while before you bump into a different culture where there's much more acceptance and start to realize I have a lot of unconsciously absorbed biases that I need to really know more about. I think that is starting to happen, but it's conversations like this that make it possible, really.
What you just said caused me to voice out what I've been thinking about for the last couple of moments. And that is, I went to school, undergraduate and graduate school in Canada, and I used to travel a lot before I got sick, and of course, before the pandemic. But my recollection of that was that the rest of the world was sort of different than the United States. What do you people feel? Because you just talked about various cultures. Is it like this everywhere now in terms of the racism and the hate? Or is it just here where we're all packing sidearms?
I think if you read news from other countries, which is always a good thing to think about, you'll find
Yes.
that actually racism is being very much coming out of the corners in almost every country. It's sort of like a big boil on the skin of humanity. And one of the things that's happening, I think, is that things are getting called out more and more everywhere. And we are discovering more about ourselves as a human race, that we are really incredibly
But
racist,
I
sexist, and
think
everything else.
we are the melting pot of the world. We really are. We've pulled in people that were dissatisfied from their own countries, or couldn't make a living in their countries. Here we have that. My father thought the streets were paved with gold, and he left his starving family to see if he could make something of himself. But what is important is there's a lot of cultures here. We don't think about and give them honor for being a culture. What we do is denigrate them. I mean, I can remember Italians were called billywops and things like that. We had foul names, and maybe, in different cultures did that. What came about was you start building esteem in your own culture, and then you include other people with it. I don't know if I'm making sense, or if this blue collar on me is choking me. Anyway,
You are making great sense, and you are getting to the essence of this all very well. I encourage you to continue. It's great.
thank you, Richard. Are you married?
Are you?
Yeah,
I'm not.
Yes.
No, I used to be, but
Okay. It's okay.
Anyway.
I think Sheila wanted to say something. Sheila, I saw your hand go up.
Yeah, I just was wondering, seems that a lot of the reasoning behind, or the reason for acting or pronouncing the way we do and I do and other people do against other peoples or unlike me is because of the need to have a scapegoat. I think I need to, and then I need to look at why that is. What is it that the people that I'm scapegoating are trying to take away from me that I need to down them so that they don't have the opportunity to take it away from me? It seems to me that there's that, and it's also fear of the other. So I think it's both a scapegoat thing, and I think it's also the fear of the other.
It's very human to create hierarchies. That seems to be as old as history and as old as humanity. Evelyn.
Yes, I'm late to the meeting, so I don't know what you talked about right away, but I Googled microaggressions because I really didn't know what it was, and I couldn't get the article to come up that you'd put in there personally. I don't know what happened. But anyway, so I found, well, that's okay. Maybe other people did, but so I Googled it, and on YouTube, just a wonderful man. Daryl, spelled D-E-R-A-L-D, Wing, S-U-E, Sue.
Yes.
He's Chinese. He's a professor at Columbia University. Have you seen his
Yeah.
videos and whatnot? There's one that's 30 minutes long, but he's written this book called Microaggressions in Everyday Life. And I certainly want to get it and read it because I didn't realize what we were talking about. But just such things as if you see a Black person or something and you grasp your purse. And he showed the woman who the elevator door opened. All along, there was a Black man and she didn't get on the elevator because and so, I mean, I am wondering about other examples of microaggression. I'm just, it's a new word to me, and I'm sure we all are guilty of it in some way and would like to know what else to look for.
Have you encountered anything like that, Evelyn?
Have I? No, I don't think so.
Think it happened?
I mean, I'm aware of what maybe it is, but what popped up? Examples of racial microaggressions. Wow.
Yeah. Reed is sharing a chart that comes from one of those sites. It talks about some very classic examples of things that can happen to people.
Oh.
Like I was saying before, who doesn't look like you. Sometimes we make assumptions that someone who does not look like us must be X, Y, Z. And so there's a lot of great stuff online. Actually, Evelyn, that was great that you went and found something because.
Yeah, I mean, he really, he told what his life was about, and just a really good, there's a 30-minute one by him.
Yeah, Dr. Seuss has written 2 books actually and published a whole lot of different videos, everywhere from 2 minutes to probably 10 hours, I don't know, but he does a lot of lecturing and has worked with lots of students. So he has great examples. But this thing that that Reed is sharing, one of the things I was going to talk to you about too is like, some people feel that by saying things like, well, I'm colorblind, I don't see color. And we feel like maybe that's a wonderful way to say how much we accept everybody. But to a person of color that says, I don't see you, I don't acknowledge your heritage. If you're not like me, you should be.
So Venera's melting pot shows up there.
Yeah, it can be.
I just asked the question last week. Who was the first person that called us white? I'd like to know, because I don't think we have any real white people. We all have a little sense of color in us. What is this distinguished thing called white?
It's at least 600 years old, probably older than that. But the whole sort of colonial period of English expansion, certainly being white was part of that. They felt very empowered by whiteness to consider everybody else worthy of being vanquished. Dila?
Yeah, what you just said about bullying happening to the other, I was bullied pretty much a lot of my elementary school time, from about 3rd grade on until I got into high school, to some physical bullying of pushing and throwing stones at, as well as being ignored and the like. And I'm certainly not Black and I'm white, but it was the other. I was different, I guess. And I still, I never have the opportunity to say, like, why did you do that? My folks did bring the 3 or 4 boys that threw stones at me into our home, and we talked about it with their fathers and being there, and they apologized. It didn't happen again. But at the same time, it was frightening, very frightening to me. And so in a sense, I do understand that, being the other. And when I'm walking down the hallway of the high school or even of the elementary school, and people go and walk on the other side of the hall from me, which happened a lot. You know, I understand. I truly can say I understand what it feels like to be the other. And it's just complicated by being of a different color. I happen to be white, which made it a little problem, maybe easier. I don't know. Anyway, enough of that.
May I say something about
Yes.
comedians, on stage comedians, and their way they have of destructing the audience. There used to be Don Rickles had a very popular command of this show, and I frankly hated it. All I could see was, oh my God, he's going to find somebody else to criticize. And everyone laughs. Am I alone in feeling this way? I even feel this way. Even today, I hear make fun of yourself and be my guest, but don't go and do that to other people. I mean, it's not your right. Hello.
Yeah, and that's a big piece of our culture too, is, you know, it's the hierarchical method of diminishing other people to make ourselves feel better. Very popular with teenage boys, still, or girls too. Girls can be just as awful.
No, I mean, don't leave out the teenage girls. They could be quite reckless.
Yep.
And they can put the death knell on your party real fast.
Well,
So little darlings have a new tool now that they, and this tool is our cell phones, and I mean, it's like swallowing the bad pills.
well,
I'm daily I wake up and I say to myself, well, so what's missing here? Did I'm still awake. But out there, it's really growing big, you know. We have a lot to learn, always.
Reed and Anna, this is a wonderful example of, quite frankly, what the Senior Center has been doing all along in this inclusion study. So, Reed, you made it happen from the beginning. So let's keep doing it, please.
You know, it's said in South Pacific, the song is, you've got to be carefully taught.
One of the pieces that I always think about is that basically what we're trying to do is change human nature.
Yes.
And we are. I mean, there's a wonderful book called Factfulness, by one of the founders of the World Health Organization. And he talks about how so much of our views about what's going on in the whole world are actually pretty out of date, and that things are much better than we think in terms of education and in terms of quality of life, that more people have water and access to electricity and access to schools and so forth. But it's still, we have such a long way to go. And I think we sort of have to have both. We have to have the awareness that we need to really work hard, and we have to have the hope that we can see that there is progress being made. I mean, 10 years ago, people weren't talking about this stuff at all, or very little, or very few. And now it's really common to have wider, broader conversations. And I think that's really healthy.
It certainly is. And you can't, I can't at least, I have been ineffective in being able to educate, which is what we're all trying to do here, somebody else about the alternatives that are possible. That's really a more worldly way of saying, I think, the same thing.
The thing that occurs to me is that it's really difficult to know if we've affected somebody or not, because often the response isn't immediate. I'm thinking about years and years ago when I was teaching a program for master gardeners, and talked about not using chemicals and got this huge reaction from a number of people who were hugely offended and upset. And then years later, ran into somebody and she said, "You don't remember me, I'm sure, but I bet you remember my husband." And when she started reminding me of the way he had interrupted this lecture I was giving, I said, "I do actually remember your husband." And she said, "Well, you might be interested in hearing that recently he said, you know, we need to get rid of these chemicals. We need to clean out that shed. And by the way, we need to start a compost heap." And she said, "I thought about saying," and then she said, "Oh, what a good idea, because why bother?" But I thought it was interesting. And I was kind of happy to hear that. Like, it took years, but some of that got through to the guy. And of course, it wasn't only what I had said, other people's. And I think that's a really good example that it can take a lot of repetition for us to change. And it can take a lot of, but each of us can do, like Robin is saying, what do you do? And part of the issue is we get shocked. We get shocked by something happening that surprises us, that somebody is so, somebody we love and care for might say something awful. Say hi, Ollie. Hi.
Hi.
And we don't know
there.
how to
Well,
respond. And sometimes we're frozen in that moment, like, I got nothing here. But what Robin said is then she went back and tried to connect and communicate. And we may bump into somebody else's defensiveness that makes it really hard to listen and hear. But there's, to me, I'm thinking that still probably could lead to a really good conclusion down the road. Like that person maybe she lost a friend, maybe she didn't. Maybe that person was hurt and put off, but maybe over time, more will sink in. So I feel like it's always worth a try, and that we shouldn't feel despair if we don't see the result right away.
Talking about how to be a bystander and say, you know, I have friends who and relatives who support Trump, and it's really hard, you know, to know what to say to try to convince them that they're wrong. And it's the same with microaggressions and everything else, and the same with urging people to get vaccines if they won't, you know, but doing it in a nice, I mean, I would like to learn how to be more persuasive in those regards without getting angry. So anyway, I think knowing how to react to microaggression is the same as trying to react to those things. Anyway, need help.
So we're kind of running out of time, but it sounds like that we could go on with this topic for quite a long time. I am very happy to look into finding a bystander training program that we could, and Reed is interested in that too. So we can certainly do that. I know we might do it more than once, because I think it's the kind of thing that takes some practice. And it, you know, we all have opportunities where, and like what happened to Robin, it can be so shocking in the moment that we don't use our skills right off the bat.
We need practice.
But yeah, we need to help each other and to do some learning.